Okay, we'll just do a soft start. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for making it out here on a beautiful day. You're here for Laura Lengnick's workshop, 5 Steps to Your Regenerative Resilience Plan, a workshop for farmers. My name is Sarah Gerkink. I'm moderating the session with Shannon Post, who's right over there. Shannon is our new farmer education coordinator, so if you have any questions about conference or future farmer education programming at Oak, find her. I am Oak's new organic production specialist, so my role is to support farmers with their production needs, and I'm available to offer support in anything from production planning, troubleshooting challenges, implementing new systems, scaling up, and more. So please consider me a resource to save you time, track down evidence-based resources, develop or locate useful planning tools, or get a referral to an Oak partner or advisor who can help. There's more information about Oak's Organic Production Assistance Program on our website. And then just a couple of housekeeping items. There is water and coffee just outside to the right. Restrooms are, if you take a left here and go down the hall, they'll be on your right. So 2 lefts and then a right into the bathroom. And yeah, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to ask Shannon or I. So without further ado, this is Laura Lengnick. She's the Director of Agriculture at the Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming. Laura is an award-winning soil scientist who has put sustainability values into action as a researcher, policymaker, educator, activist, and farmer for over 30 years. She regularly leads regenerative climate resilience planning workshops for farmers throughout the country. And her book, Resilient Agriculture, Cultivating Food Systems for a Changing Climate, tells the adaptation stories of more than 45 climate-smart farmers and ranchers growing food across the U.S. You can learn more about her work at cultivatingresilience.com. All right, Laura, you're up.
Good morning. This is actually a workshop. You're gonna work. I'm not gonna work. So just to let you know that. Also, I want to welcome anyone who's coming over from the seed saving workshop as well. We had 20 people signed up for this to go through the session this morning and then the session on, I think, Saturday to make the 3rd step part of this planning effort. So maybe folks are they're gonna kind of filter in as we get going this morning, but I would like to get started. So we'll just get going, and as folks come in, I'll integrate them into the work that we're doing. So what I want to do today and on Saturday, the session on adaptation on Saturday, is we're going to get you started walking through these 5 steps to a regenerative climate resilience plan for your farm. What's regenerative? What does that mean to me? To me, that means that we are engaging in the power of nature to enhance or promote the resilience of your farm. So we're taking advantage of what natural systems, so-called ecosystem services, if you've ever heard that word, services like reducing pest numbers, not eliminating them altogether, but reducing them to a point where they're not interfering with your profitability, for example. Are these ideas new? Who's never heard of the idea that we're managing nature for benefit to the farm? Raise your hand. Awesome. Well, I kind of thought so. I am at an organic farming conference. But just to give you a little more, that word regenerative, it's getting beaten up a lot right now, and from my perspective, for good reason. But what I found, the value that I found in this idea of regenerative is that it's really speaking to engaging with nature in new and more powerful ways. And certainly when you're thinking about farm resilience, to ignore the potential that nature has to enhance resilience of the farm is a mistake, in my opinion. So that's where that regenerative, that's how I'm using regenerative in this workshop. Some other words in there. Resilience. What is resilience? That is a word, it's kind of a cool word. Or maybe its moment's even passed a little bit. But it turns out that resilience actually is a very deep idea. If you get below the headlines, what you find out, or what I found out, when about 15 years ago I started looking more carefully into what does resilience mean and how can farmers use resilience. Is there anything there for agriculture, basically, was the question I asked. And what I found out was that there's actually very deep and long-lived roots in this type of resilience called social ecological resilience. Social, people, ecological, nature. We're thinking about how people can manage the land and their community to enhance resilience. So all of the ideas that I share with you in this workshop and in the guide and on the websites and all that, we'll get into that in a minute, are all coming out of this type of resilience. Now what makes it confusing, or at least it was confusing to me when I got started in this, was that there are at least 3 other very well-established bodies of knowledge that address resilience. And what really makes it confusing is sometimes those other bodies of knowledge use the same language as social ecological resilience, and sometimes to mean the same thing, and sometimes the same language to mean different things. So if you dig into this, you may be aware you're likely to have a little bit of confusion at some point. But what I decided as I was working on understanding resilience was that if you look at those 4 different types, I've told you about social ecological, people and nature. There's also building resilience or engineering resilience, and that's got nothing to do with life. It's about building things to withstand stress, different kinds of conditions. Very useful. Not so useful when you're thinking about managing a whole farm, because there's no life in that. It's just that building resilience or engineering resilience. It's just about how high do you need to build a wall and how strong does it need to be, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's engineering resilience. The third kind of resilience is psychological resilience. Really good, certainly useful in farming. Absolutely, there's people in that equation. But it's not the whole story. And very often I'm noticing in agriculture that's where the ideas of psychological resilience are kind of coming in and being used to think about managing the farm more generally. So again, I would argue that social ecological, people and nature, that's the right bucket of knowledge for us to be drawing from for farming. And then the last kind of resilience is disaster resilience. Really important, whole bunch of great ideas and experience and practices and theories around how do we organize to prepare for disaster. But as I was looking at all that, I thought, I don't think I really want to be talking with farmers about preparing for disaster. How about let's think about how we reorganize, redesign, and manage farms to avoid disaster. So again, good information in that disaster resilience bucket, but I don't think that's where the heart of adapting agriculture. That's not the heart of adapting agriculture. That's kind of after. That's when you use the social ecological, people and nature, you use those ideas, you reorganize your farm, or you may find that you've already done a pretty good job. In fact, very often, organic farmers have already done a pretty good job because there's, organics are based on this foundation that you're going to work with nature to grow food, right? But at any rate, once you start learning about social ecological resilience, which you'll be doing in this workshop, you find out, hey, I'm doing pretty good, or hey, that little area in my farm operation probably needs some work. But you begin to use these ideas to both design, redesign, to assess, and then manage going forward your farm. And the cool thing about social ecological resilience, at least I found it very attractive when I first learned about it, was that there's a lot of wisdom in it to help us design and manage farms so that when there is a disturbance, there's no damage. So you never need to think about disaster relief and all of that. You want that out there because there are times that it doesn't matter what you do, that the shock or the disturbance is really strong and it's going to cause some damage to your farm. But what I have learned in the last 15 years, and I've been working with farmers around the country, learning about this and thinking together with them about how we use these ideas. What I have learned is that there really is a lot that farmers can do, both in design and in management, to increase what's called the response capacity of the farm. The ability of the farm to respond to a disturbance, an insult, a shock, in a way that protects that farm system. So you never need to be thinking about repairing. So that's one part of resilience. The second part of resilience, because it turns out there's actually way more about resilience than just bouncing back. And I've already described one part to you, that response capacity. The second important capacity in resilience and resilient system is the ability to recover. So the way this works when you're thinking about it on a farm and you're using social ecological resilience to guide your actions, the way that recovery capacity works is that you can design your system to recover swiftly and at low cost when there is damage to the system. So that's that second piece. The last piece is what's called transformation capacity. And what that really is it invites farmers to think about the future, look at where we're headed weather-wise, and begin now preparing for that future. So that's those three parts. That's social ecological resilience. And if you were to spend just a little bit of time reading about these 4 kinds of resilience, I said 4 kinds of resilience, I think you're very likely to agree with me that social ecological resilience is the most useful when we're thinking about managing farms and the food system as well. Okay, well, I hadn't planned that little bit, but there we go. That gives you a little taste of sort of the framework for a lot of the ideas that I'll be teaching in the workshop and that you're going to be practicing using in the workshop. So what does today look like? You can see there's an agenda on the wall over there, and basically, thank you, and basically we've got, what, 3.5 hours or so, I think, today. And I've kind of chunked it out into half-hour sections. And this is just so if you're the type of person that wants a roadmap on the day, and I'm one of those kind of people, I appreciate maps. What you'll see is that we've got a little bit of an intro session. I'll do a little what I call a lesson. It's a very short little presentation giving you a few ideas that you can maybe use in your own work in the workshop. What I just did there, I hadn't planned to do it, but that idea of response, recovery, transformation, and that's social ecological resilience, that's what I would call a lesson. Y'all already got one little free extra, no charge lesson here this morning. Let's see, so about half-hour chunks, I'll do a lesson, and then next you'll have a half-hour to work. So you'll be doing some work. And then we'll we'll get back together and hear a few highlights of what you discovered in your work. We'll have a little break. We'll have another lesson, another work period, and then we'll finish up, okay? So that's what the day looks like. Any questions right now for me? Okay. Last thing I want to do before I break y'all into groups is just give you a little bit more. You heard yada, 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 30 years, yada, yada, research and farming and la, la, la. But, and I'm not, I shouldn't make light of it. It's kind of embarrassing to have to stand up there and like, yeah. But I'm proud of it. It's like, I've been doing this a long, long time. And it's really nice. You know, when I was young, I used to look at old people and think, someday I want to be that cool. I just want to be like that. And it's pretty satisfying. I think I kind of am getting there, which for me is pretty satisfying. So, but the thing I wanted to say, just to add to that little intro that Sarah gave, was for the purposes of this workshop and this part of the kind of work I do, I think the most valuable experience that I bring to this work, and I just want to be sure you know this, is that I have spent about 8 years of the last 30 growing diversified organic vegetables in market gardens, never really large operations, both in Tidewater, Virginia, and also then in Asheville, North Carolina, which is where I live now. I've lived here for about 20 years. And I was doing a market gardening operation with 2 neighbors in Asheville, and what caught my notice around this thing called changing weather or climate change was in 2011, we had the wettest, in Asheville, it was the wettest year ever recorded, unprecedented. Have you noticed that word showing up a lot? Unprecedented. Do you know what that means? Do you really know what that means? I looked it up. It means never having been done or experienced before. So we had this unprecedented weather in 2011. And what got our notice, me and my 2 farming buddies, was that we went out one day in our beautiful, we had a half acre of these luscious garden beds. They were a decade into production. They were really beautiful. And there were springs bubbling up all through this production area on our land. And I thought, wow. And asked around some of the old folks in the cove where I live. I've never seen anything like that. Never seen anything at all like that. And that really got my attention, and I started looking into what the heck is going on with the weather, and then eventually what can farmers do about it. So, so I think that work, my experience in a diversified market garden, essentially, we marketed to restaurants, we had a small CSA, and we also marketed at a local farmer's market. I think that really speaks to the way that I approached this question of, is there any value to farmers in these ideas of resilience? And if there might be, how do we use them? How do we put them into action? Okay. So I want to, just a little bit of intro here, and then I'm going to break you up into groups. But I just want to point out that there'll be 2 main resources that we'll use in this workshop. And one of them is the SARE Bulletin. It was put out in 2018, and it lays out a lot of these ideas, including the one I just shared with you, that response, recovery, and transformation. And you've got their, I brought copies, I think enough for everyone who registered for the workshop. So if you're in here from the seed saving workshop, please don't take anything until the end of the day if you stay. Let's let the folks that registered for this have the materials. So there'll be two main resources. There'll be this SARE bulletin. And then also, I don't know if y'all were able to do it, but we sent an email about a week ago and asked you to print out this little guide and bring it with you. If you didn't, it's okay, don't worry about it. But the other is this little guide, which you can find on a website, and we'll talk about it later, called Regenerative Farm Resilience. And it's a free download at that website. So it's fine if you don't have it today. I went ahead and printed out the important bits of that guide that you'd be using today. Okay, so what I understood is that we had about 20 folks registered, and looking over the registration, we were kind of roughly half. The farmers in the group were roughly about half more than 10 acres. They're managing more than 10 acres. And then the other half that were farming were managing less than 10 acres, or about 10 acres or less. And so I think for the workshop today, I want to get y'all into those groups. And if you see there's a sign over there, if you're farming more than 10 acres, why don't you gather around that table there. If you're farming less than 10 acres, these two tables here. We also had a couple of hang on a second before you move. We had a couple of aspiring farmers. And what I want to invite you to do is go to whichever table you aspire to. If you're looking for a larger scale, go for that table. If you're looking for smaller scale, go for that side. However, I want to invite you to do mostly listening. Mostly listening, okay, while you're there. We also have several landowners, the non-farming landowners, and again, invite you to do the same thing. Go to whichever scale makes sense for your land. And also, I want to ask you to mostly listen and ask questions of the experienced farmers at your table. Okay? So once you move, I'll let you move in just a second. What I'd like you to do is just get to know each other. I'm going to give you about 15 minutes or so. You see we're already off my agenda, but that's okay. At least we know where we were supposed to be. About 15 minutes to get to know each other. Name, location, what you farm, and one or two weather-related challenges that you're managing. And then we'll get going with the lesson and then get you going to work, okay? If you have any questions, I'll be right here. Just go ahead and get moving between the two tables and start introducing yourselves to each other. All right, great, thanks. Just before, I'd like to do just a little lesson then on the first step of this resilience planning, which is thinking about farm goals. But before I do that little lesson, I really would appreciate it if one or two folks from each group, if you would speak a little bit to what y'all talked about, just something that came up for you in your group, kind of a little bit of a report out. We also have two, Sarah and Shannon, taking notes and to help y'all think about what bubbles up in these discussions. So I'd also invite them, if that's more comfortable for your group, we can ask Sarah and Shannon to speak a little bit. But whatever. Who would like to say something in the 10 plus acres group about what just happened? 10 plus, yeah. Anybody feel like sharing? You're mud farming? Yeah, that became clear in the discussion. Yeah. Anything from the 10 or less?
Yeah, so this group talked a lot about land conditions that do value to them.
So wind issues plus too dry and too wet, yeah. Yeah, wind is something that I think kind of was not on anyone's radar, no pun intended. And yet it's really a big deal. And it's tough in the West, but it's always been tough in the West. But it's in the East where people are being surprised by wind. And I was listening into both groups and happened to be in the 10 or less group and heard that, you know, the wind came and it just took out all of these essentially temporary structures. I think that's a particularly difficult challenge for small-scale diversified veg production because the plus is you have hoop houses, greenhouses, caterpillar tunnels, all that stuff, and that's great. It's protected growing. You know, when we're thinking about it in terms of climate resilience, protected growing is where it's at, right? But they are not, at least now, typically engineered to withstand the kind of wind. And sometimes the rain is so intense that it's also damaging those structures. So I think that's something to think about in terms of that transform piece, that make a transformation, think about the future, and think about what's going to need to change in your growing system to be able to withstand what's coming. Because I hear a lot. In fact, I noticed learning about Kentucky, the state of Kentucky, and the kinds of things that they're doing already to help farmers adapt. I noticed this language in the state, this idea of a new normal. Have you heard that idea? Well, I want to let you know that's absolutely wrong. Get it out of your mind and don't think about it that way. Why? Because the only new normal is that these changes we're seeing in weather are going to get more frequent and more intense. It's actually a moving target. And so I think it does not serve anyone well to imagine that what's happening is that weather is just chunking into a new place, and then it'll settle down and be stable. Because that's not what's happening, and there's really good evidence, including what farmers will say. So more on that a little later in the second half of this when we talk about climate risk. All right, well, thank you for a little bit of the report out. What I want to do now is just a real short lesson on I want to just introduce this idea of this 5-step planning process, explain a little bit about where it comes from, and then walk you through the work that I'm going to ask you to do for that first work period today. And please, at any time, if you have a question, just raise your hand or sing out, and we'll get that answered. So here are the 5 steps to the planning process. This is just the table of contents from the guide, which you can download for free at the 5 steps to your Regenerative Climate Resilience Plan website. And so we'll be working through, in this workshop in total, we'll work through all 5 steps. At the conference, we'll be working through the first 3. So this morning, we'll be working through step 1 and step 2. And then on Saturday, we'll work through step 3. And when I say work through, really what I mean is get you started. Get you started thinking about each of these steps. So what I want to do right now is just talk about a little bit about this first step, describing your farm business goals and the current position on your farm. And I get pushback sometimes or questions about, whoa, don't make me write a farm goal again. I thought we were going to talk about how I deal with wind. I don't care about the farm. Come on. But it turns out that particularly for climate adaptation, really important that you're very clear on why you're farming. The reason is, I think these times are going to ask of all of us to change how we do things. How easy is it to change how you do things? Raise your hand if, man, easy. Easy, easy. No, it's really hard. And particularly in farming, particularly if you're a multi-generation farmer on the same land, it's actually quite a lot to step back and ask yourself, why am I farming? And this question, having a clear answer to why you're farming, is going to make it a lot easier for you to decide to recover, to put the investment into recovering from damage going forward. But even more important, it's going to really help you think creatively about making changes, transformation, that third part of resilience, to prepare or adapt to what's coming. It's going to make it easier for you to step back from the current crops you're growing, from the current practices you're using, from the markets, all of that, and rethink what you're doing on the farm, and making sure that in your goal setting, you are keeping in mind the quality of life that you desire and health of the land, even as you're being buffeted by all of these different shocks and disturbances. So that's what we'll be doing in the first half of today's workshop. I'm going to ask you to actually think a little bit about goals and write down, and we'll be using a specific kind of goal setting. But just before we get into that, I just want to let you know that everything that's in this, that I use in the workshop, in the guide, is all based in a very well-respected and at this point, almost traditional approach to farm management that's called whole farm planning. And what sets whole farm planning apart from other kinds of farm management planning are basically that it's a cycle. You don't just make a plan and go with it. You're actually first stepping back, thinking about your goals. What's the first step? Assessing resources and preference. So you're actually looking at what you prefer to do and what resources you have to do what you've planned. Then you're putting this plan together and putting it into action. And the last step, and it's the step most of us, including me, often if we're going to drop one part of the whole farm planning cycle, as it's called, this is the part we drop. Sorry. This is like major P stuff going on over here. This is the part we drop. We don't ever really take a step back and ask ourselves, did the thing we decide to do actually work? Did it actually put us in a better place, right? So that's that monitoring piece. And then replanning if need be. If it turns out it didn't work, or maybe it turns out it worked really well and you want to do more of that. In either case, you're going to have to do some more planning. So these steps very often are laid out here like the bullets. Set goals, assess resources, plan and act, monitor performance. Monitoring is going to be particularly important because in these times of climate change, because and I heard it already in the discussions this morning, there's so much volatility in the weather and also in other things that are kind of tangentially related to climate change too, right? And so because there's so much volatility, you can't assume stable conditions really for any part of your farming operation. And so to have some kind of way of testing or evaluating the quality or the farm performance is beyond just income or yield, which is pretty typical in agriculture. So monitoring that performance and then adjusting plans as you need to. So this is the basic framework that the 5 steps process uses. And then the other thing I just want to assure you, there's a lot here, I'm not going to walk through it, but I want you to assure you that the stuff that I'm asking you to do today is actually part of normal or traditional business planning, but it happens kind of before the normal business planning. And so this is from Ohio State University, and it basically shows you, you've got all these normal plans in different colors there, business, retirement plan, transition estate, all that kind of normal planning. And the things that we're going to work on today, this goal setting and business position, is happening above all that. So it happens first. Okay. And then all these other plans flow out of something like family goals, family values. And then the other thing I want to point out is that taking this whole farm approach is really, to managing for resilience, really does shift how you think about risk on your farm. And what you see on the left-hand side, that's pretty standard agricultural risk model. You've got these different silos on your farm. You're thinking about production risk, and that's separate. There's no relationship to financial risk and marketing and human risk and legal. And anybody that farms knows that that's a fine model, but how about let's draw some lines between those things, because there certainly are relationships there. Would you agree with that? Yeah. So we're taking this, what I would call at this point, flawed model of risk. It's flawed because it really doesn't work well for us in a changing climate. It just doesn't. It actually kind of never really worked that well. It had some limitations, but particularly now, it's a very limited approach to risk management. And what taking this whole farm plan approach does is moves it into a new kind of risk model. And if you notice, right in the center, you still got those nice little silos. If that's feels comfortable to you, it's nice and neat. You can think about each aspect of your farm operation in that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of value to that, right? But it takes those silos and it sticks it directly into the center of this thing, this organism, this living, social, ecological organism called the farm. And so it's keeping us always keeping in mind that any of these risks, different aspects of risk, are all happening in this whole called the farm. And the farm is happening in this whole called the family. And when I use family in this workshop, I'm thinking about that very broadly. It's the group of people that love that land, that work that land, that care about the farm and the people on the farm and the land, okay? And then this family is operating within this whole called community. And having this approach, this risk within farm, within family, within community, this is the result of using resilience thinking. Much, much more opportunity to cultivate mutually beneficial relationships that benefit the farm if you remember that there's these relationships, these wholes within wholes, that you're actually living in and can design and cultivate and manage for the benefit of the farm. Make sense? Okay. So that's what you're about to embark on. These 5 steps actually help you live this new model of risk, which actually moves us from a more traditional risk management approach to more of a cultivating resilience approach. There's a whole lot of research being done right now in the big corporate, global, what are they? They're kind of risk management, global corporations that handle risk management for all these big companies. There's a ton of research going on right now there to say that this approach, this new approach, actually not only reduces the costs of managing for damage and reduces the, but it also actually inspires creativity and innovation. So all kinds of other benefits when you can make this shift. Okay, so we'll get started now this morning on this first step, which will be describe your farm business goals and your current position. And what I'm going to do is briefly introduce 2 resilience planning tools that can help you think about your business in this new perspective of farm within family within community. And so the first one, I'm guessing a lot of you have already heard about. Maybe you're even thinking, resilience thinking tool, no way. This is just SWOT. I did this in my Farm Business Management 101 class 50 years ago, right? Anybody feeling that way? No. Not a very judgmental crowd. You can tell I spend a lot of time trying to convince folks this is a good idea. And maybe not, maybe I don't need to do that so much. Well, anyway, SWOT is a very standard business tool, but it turns out that it actually is an excellent tool for creating a snapshot of your whole farm, of your whole under management, right? Has anyone ever done a SWOT for their farm before? Great, we've got, anybody in the larger scale? Excellent, so we've got a little bit of experience at each table. So basically, short and sweet, SWOT is just, you lay out it's like a map of the strengths, the internal characteristics of your business, what you think of as strengths and weaknesses. Those are internal to your business. Your resource, your land, the people you have running it, the assets you have to keep that business going, those kinds of things. And then the other part of the map is external to the business. So this would be opportunities and also threats. And so changing more variable weather, changing weather patterns fit very squarely in that threats category of a SWOT. So creating a SWOT gives you your current position of your business in one page. It's really useful when you get to the place in this planning process where you're trying to choose among practices that you would like to implement. Okay, and then the second one I'm going to spend a little more time on, holistic. I'm going to ask you to try writing a certain kind of a farm goal. It's out of the farm management strategy called holistic management. Maybe you've heard of it. Most often, holistic management is associated with pasture-based livestock production, but actually, holistic management can be applied to anything, any kind of organizational management, and it actually has been. Holistic management has been used to manage a small city in Colorado, for example, and lots of other applications of holistic management. And this 3-part goal, the aspect of this 3-part goal that is so important to resilience, to helping you move into this new way of thinking about risk on your farm, the important bits are the quality of life. What kind of life do you desire? What does that look like? So you'll be thinking about that a little bit this morning. And then commitments, which is also known as forms of production or sometimes known as behaviors and systems. But basically, it's what do you have to do? How do you have to be in order to achieve that quality of life? And then the last bit of the holistic goal is to imagine that what the future resource base needs to look like, land, yourself, and your community, in order to allow you to meet your commitments, in order for you to achieve your quality of life. This is a really different kind of farm goal. Would you agree? Yeah. And also, I'll warn you now, it's not always easy. We live in a culture that kind of talks about quality of life as, is that really important? I'm seeing some smiles and a few head nods. Would you agree? That's certainly not top of mind in our culture, your quality of life. Yeah. So I want to invite you to just say no. In fact, I just want us all to do it right now. I want everybody to grab all of their discomfort at the idea that you're going to insist on a quality of life and then figure out how to get it. I want everybody to grab it and throw it out of the room. Only for a half hour. That's all I'm asking. Just give this a try. It's not easy, and we're all imperfect at doing this, but I want to at least ask you to give it a try and just let it go, all the self-criticism and doubt and all this, what I like to think of as the murmuring of mother culture, telling us, all that matters is how much money we make, right? I mean, we all know that's not true. You wouldn't be organic farmers if you thought that was all that mattered, right? But the holistic goal, writing a holistic goal, actually allows you to set it down on paper. And it turns out that that's really important to actually achieving your goals, writing it down. Okay? Okay. So last thing, I'll just show you a few of the tools that I put on the tables. This is, again, straight out of the guide. This is an example of a SWOT table. And all I want to say here, you can find, you've got this on your table, you can grab one and start using it if you want to work on the SWOT. But basically, this is laying out strengths and weaknesses. Those are the internal characteristics of your business, and opportunities and threats are your external. And then what you've got down the side are just little prompts to help you think about different aspects or characteristics of your business. So that's worksheet 2 in the guide. And then also, you've got in the guide, I didn't copy this particular page, but there's an example farm in the guide with all of the worksheets filled out already for you. So this is an example of some of what you might want to add, fill in, right? And what I'll do, because I neglected to copy this for you, is when I'm done, once you get working, I'm going to put the slide back on this, okay? But you do have, there's one other worksheet, and you do have examples of filling out that worksheet. Okay, so this is the SWOT analysis. This is, you're creating a snapshot of your current business position. And then the other one, this is worksheet 1 from the guide. This is where eventually you would write down your holistic goal, which, remember, there's 3 parts: quality of life, commitments or forms of production, and future resource base. Quality of life, typically what you do, particularly when you're doing a fast first holistic goal, is that you think about some qualities of your life that are really important to you. What values really add to your own sense of well-being? And then for each of those, you would come up with an example of a behavior, commitment or form of production. So for example, well, and you've got an example I think of. Yeah. Yeah, I think I can show you an example of that in a minute. Sorry, I didn't add it here. So the idea is, so where you're trying to head in the next half hour is you can choose to do one or the other. You can choose to do a little bit of both, whatever you'd like to do with the next half hour. But you're basically going to try to fill in one or both of these sheets, these worksheets, worksheet 1 and 2. Okay, the last thing I want to do was to just tell you a little more about holistic management. And I don't get any money, they're not paying me every time I say the name at all. But I do think that when I looked out over different business management strategies, this was the only established farm management strategy that I think incorporates resilience considerations. And as I said, holistic management, most people have heard about the kind of holistic management that the Savory Institute does, which is very much connected with pasture-based livestock production. But there's also another organization in the US called Holistic Management International, and they're much broader. They cover a lot more kinds of agriculture. They also do personal holistic management, kind of your home holistic management and that. So I would encourage you to, if you're a livestock producer, certainly check out both. But if you don't produce, or if that's not a big part of your operation, I'd invite you to go to Holistic Management International. I think that would probably be more useful to you. And then the last thing I want to point out here, so what you've got on the right-hand side is just one visual that collects all the different practices that are included in holistic management. And do you see that practice 2? It's the row 2 and 3, just up here. Purpose and holistic goals, so that kind of shows you where you'll be using practice 2 a little bit today for that holistic goal. Notice it's quality of life and values. In this case, they call it behaviors and and systems, behaviors and systems, and then vision, so that future vision. But what I just want you to notice, I want to alert you to, is that we're just using one of a set of practices within the holistic management. Okay, and so then here's an example of that worksheet 1, the holistic goal filled out. And this is in the guide, which you can download for free. And you have copies of this on the table, okay, so you can take a look at. And then just before I let you go, I want to let you know one tried and true way to quickly write your first holistic goal is to copy. And so what I did, copy other farmers, and so you'll find this on the table too, but what I did was just collected a whole bunch of quality of life statements from different farmers' holistic goals that I've worked with over really the last 20 years or so, and then commitments, also called forms of production, and then here's some example future resource-based or future vision. That's that last part of that holistic goal. And notice that last part, you think about how we need to be in the future in order to be able to meet our commitments, in order to achieve our quality of life, the land, and our community. So you want to try to include all 3 of those. The last tip I'll give you is when you're doing that future resource base, it really helps to just put yourself in that future, that desired future. Walk around and describe what you see. What do you see in community? What do you see on your land? Who do you see that you are? And write it in the present tense, even though we're talking about the future. Okay? Okay, last few things. Also, you have copies of this. If you're having trouble, if you want to work on this holistic goal, but you're having trouble getting started, you've got on the table some questions you can ask yourself to kind of get into that. What do I value? What does matter to me? And then if it helps any, also there's this list of just different words and phrases to help you find some language to describe what you think or feel about your quality of life. You've also got that at the table. And then if you really want to get into this, also at the table, you've got, if you're the kind of person, and I'm like this, I just want to read something before I get started. Give me some directions, you know. You've got that on the table as well if you want to sit and quickly read this. And this will get you kind of oriented to what it is you're trying to do. Okay, so that's what we're working on for the next half hour. I'll come around. I know there's kind of lots of papers, and folks have been going through them a little bit. So if you can't find something you need, just raise your hand. I'll come over and help you. And I would just encourage you to grab whichever resource makes the most sense to you. You've got a little packet that includes an example holistic goal filled out, and then all those lists and examples of statements. You've also got that SWOT worksheet as well. So you can get going on that. And what I'm going to do is go back to the SWOT example. So if you work on the SWOT and you want, I failed to get that copied for you. So that's there. So let's get moving. You got a half hour. I'll be here. Raise your hand if you got a question. If you want to spread out and work, feel free to do that. Move to another table, whatever you'd like to do. All right, let's get started with the second half. So you have theoretically gotten a good way forward with the first step. Oof, sorry. I really have to watch that. Is that coming? It's coming across to you, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Anyway, so you've got the worksheets, you've had a little experience, we've had a little bit of discussion about that first step, which is you're creating a holistic goal, 3-part holistic goal for your farm. I was just having a discussion about why that's how that benefits farmers, and I just want to say that part of my decision to recommend doing the whole a 3-part goal in this particular process of planning has to do with what I've learned in the last 12 years, working with about 50 farmers around the country. And I didn't plan it this way, but about a third of them use holistic management of one kind or another. Some of them are full-on holistic managers. Others just grab some of the practices out of holistic management. But we were having a little discussion over here just a second ago, and I've also, as a result of what I've learned from those farmers, I decided to make a personal holistic goal, which is just me and my family working together to figure out the quality of life we desire, the commitments we're making to that quality of life, and then what our long-term vision is. And what I've found, I think what's so hard about these times is that there's so much coming at us all the time, and it's requiring a lot of decisions. All the time, decisions. And they're decisions about things that are, what was that word I started with this morning? Unprecedented. So, you know, it's tricky. It's tricky making decisions, and it's hard to have confidence when you're making decisions in this kind of an environment. And what the holistic goal has done for me and my family, but then also more important to this workshop, what farmers who have been using it for 20 or 30 years tell me is they feel more confident in their decisions. And the way it feels to me is that I feel like I'm standing on a solid foundation as I'm having to make all these decisions with all this stuff coming at me. So that's an important benefit of going ahead and doing that exercise of writing it out, that holistic goal. So just before we get moving on the second step, is there any lingering question or comment anybody wants to make right now that they think might be helpful for others to hear about that, either the holistic goal or the SWOT? Did anyone work on the SWOT? Did anybody choose to do that instead? Yeah, or as well as? Any ahas from the SWOT at all? Any things you're going to check into as a result of working on that SWOT a little bit? No?
I think that we highlighted maybe our weaknesses and threats, and those seem more obvious to me, where it's took a little more time to think about what our strengths really are.
And I'm sorry, what did you highlight?
It took a little bit more time to think about our strengths and opportunities, and it was easier to think of our weaknesses and threats, and maybe that speaks to my state of mind when it comes to climate change.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chelsea. Yeah, so you were able to, easier to think about weaknesses and threats than strengths and opportunities. Yeah, and particularly, and that's, I think, pretty typical. I think that's pretty typical. And knowing your strengths and being able to recognize that even in all this bad news, there may be some opportunities. Really important piece to keeping yourself moving forward in this very uncertain time that we're in right now. Because we do have strengths, but sometimes it can be hard to remember them when, the wind has blown down all your greenhouses and hoop houses, and it takes 6 months for the insurance guy to get out there, and so you have to kind of look at that. So, okay. Any thought from the 10 acre plus table? Anything you'd like to share you think might be helpful? Could you speak up just a little bit? I can't.
We were talking about the opportunities that were there, and you feel seeking out grants and
Okay.
and just communicating with your peers and gleaning information from them and putting it into practice what we try to obviously do. There's a lot of opportunities.
Yeah. So sounds like y'all focus some on opportunities and thinking them through, like working with neighbors or peers, and maybe going for some grants. And if you're not aware of it, I think there is this incredible opportunity that is here on our doorstep for funding conservation practices that actually will cultivate resilience on your farm. And I know that Oak is involved in one of those projects. Those are the climate smart commodities projects going on all over the country right now. And so I think in particular right now there is an unprecedented opportunity for conservation incentives to help farmers adopt some of these practices that we know not only mitigate greenhouse gas emissions or either reduce emissions on farms, increase the amount of carbon that farms can soak up in soil and plants, and then also enhance resilience of the farm as well. So, so one of the, related to that is just to keep that in mind, because at the end of this planning process, you're going to have a very specific plan with a set of practices that you think makes sense to implement. And so at that point, you can begin to look for opportunities, if you choose, to find some support, some government or local support for implementing these practices. And as I said, we're in it is unprecedented right now, the potential to get funding. In particular for organic farmers, and in particular for small and mid-scale farmers. Many of those climate smart projects have specific targets They want to fund farmers who have never before participated in the conservation assistance programs. So keep an eye out for that. I think there's a real opportunity for you to find some assistance, cost share assistance, to get your plan done once you have, to put your plan into action once you've got this plan finished. Okay, so step 1 behind us. Step 2, what is that? That's probably more what you thought would happen in this workshop. We're entering in step 2, and what that is taking a look at the climate risk and describing it. Like, how is climate change showing up on your farm? And yeah, there's a worksheet. And I've created this guide with these worksheets, not because I've spent lots of years teaching, which I have, but rather because this guide, the whole idea behind this guide is that it's a DIY guide. So I tried to create this guide so that farmers could actually work through it, most of it themselves. And I've probably taken by now 200 farmers through this process in the last 4 years or so. And farmers over and over again tell me the worksheets are really helpful. It gives you an idea about what you're trying to get done, you know, at the end of whatever step. So if the worksheets aren't your jam, ignore them, but write it down somehow, because that's a really important part of this process. Okay, so what I'd like to do is take just a few minutes to teach you just a little bit about what climate risk is. And then I'm going to set you loose again to begin to gather and put in one place and write down the kinds of weather challenges that are creating disturbances or causing challenging management situations on your farm. And I thought, just because I'm in Kentucky, I wanted to bring some, we've got lots of Kentucky farmers in the room, but I thought it might be useful because I found this little video of Kentucky farmers talking about the kinds of weather challenges that they're facing. Is that something y'all like to hear? Does that feel useful at this point? Okay, let me see if I can do this.
I saved up enough money so I could follow my dream, which was to come back and start a farm.
I think what really brought me back eventually was the family aspect of it, wanting to raise my family and my children the way that my brother and I were raised.
I was very blessed to live on farms where both of my grandparents, both sets of grandparents, lived until they were well in their 80s. I couldn't imagine a more nurturing educational environment.
You know, farming's a really good life.
I really love the excitement of farming.
It's what we do. It's part of us. We live within nature. We're part of the DNA of this ecosystem.
We feed people. We care for the planet.
You're harvesting all that hard work, and all the time and effort that's put in from beginning to end is just very rewarding to me.
My granddad would have thought we were nuts if we planted corn in March, but sometimes it happens. So in general, everything has shifted. It's not any one moment, it's not any one storm, it's not any one year or event, but in general, over the last 40 years, we're planting a month earlier than we did.
It's not predictable. Used to, you could count on spring, you would have the spring flowers, and you would evolve into summer. Now it's like, it's just dramatic. You don't know what you're going to get.
Seeing climate change and seeing it happen, it's happening gradually, but it's happening with a lot of volatility.
That weather variability, that volatility, farmers have to deal with that.
It just seems like here in the last 10 years, I'll say, and 5 especially, it just seems like that timing has been really hard to gauge.
As the weather and the climate continues to change, I think our crop rotations may change. We may be looking for crops that are better suited to whatever the new normal is.
It would make sense as the climate changes and as temperatures sway and different things like that, that would bring in a whole another host of insects and possible diseases.
A few years back, Derby Day, first Saturday of May, is considered the day you can plant outdoor non-frost tolerant crops, tomatoes, peppers, all those things. So we did that after Derby. Then a week later, we get a 27-degree freeze. We took thousands of tomato plants out of the ground, put them back in the greenhouse. So it cost us a lot of money for labor, and it slowed the plants down, so they were delayed.
It's pushing our workload into a shorter and shorter period. So that means I have to spend more money. I have to get a bigger combine because I have less days of good weather to combine. I have to get a bigger planter because I have less days of optimum time to plant. That means that I develop more debt, so I move my risk from weather risk to financial risk.
We have the 100-year rainfalls 3 years ago. We're at the 100-year, this may be the latest first frost of fall in 100 years. So we're constantly breaking these 100-year records with different types of weathering events.
I think we have more extreme weather events. I think they're more frequent. It's not uncommon anymore to have a 5-inch rain or a 10-inch rain. That never happened.
I feel like the climate is changing because of this volatility. It doesn't just rain. When it rains, it just deluge, just downpours, and physically beats the plants, not just wets them.
Yes, we're in a process of climate change, and it should be pretty obvious that if you take fossil fuels that took millions and millions of years to develop, and you put them back in the atmosphere in 200 years, you're going to have a disruption of equilibrium.
Farmers deal with science every day, but farmers can't pick and choose which science we believe in, nor should anybody else, because science is science and climate is climate, and we're all in this together, and we need to be working together, and we're all part of the problem, and we all need to be part of the solution.
Yeah, so you're thinking about water, too much and not enough, and capturing it somehow when it's too much, and also suggesting it move in certain ways across your land. That's one thing I was taught by a farmer I've been working with. This group of farmers, which I just love his approach to this was, you can't really tell water what to do, but you can certainly make suggestions and invite it to move in certain ways. So yeah, figuring out how to manage too much water and then storing that up for when you need it. Yeah, very, very common. One other thought? Derby Day, we heard Derby Day is something that some of you use for planting, as a planting time. Okay, so I'm going to let you go to begin working on the worksheet 3, which is just getting a record of all the different weather. But before we do that, I just want to let you know, I just want to give you a few more ideas. So I'm not gonna walk through this, but I do want to alert you that it's in the SARE bulletin, and you're welcome to take one. They're on the table. You can take one with you. And if you're the kind of person that likes maps, just trust that in this 5-step process, you're actually moving through all of this diagram. And notice that at the top left there, that's talking about climate risk, and that's the second step, understanding climate risk. You know what? Yeah, and so what I think is great about this diagram is it sort of unfolds all the different aspects to think about as you're putting together this idea of farm management or managing climate risk and shifting into that more resilience kind of model, that idea from risk to resilience. And the only thing I want to point out is notice on the right-hand side of this diagram, you see that response, recovery, and transformation there? Remember, I started this morning talking about those three complementary capacities of a resilient system. So it's not just about the recovery, which we often think about that. It's about bounce back, right? Resilience is about bouncing back. But it turns out that when you study social ecological resilience, so people and nature, what you find out is there are also these other two capacities that are equally, or I would argue even more important in managing for resilience. And that's that ability to design and manage systems so that they can respond to disturbances in ways that reduce or eliminate damage, right? That's that recovery, the response part. When you are managing for recovery, you can actually design and manage systems to allow you to recover more quickly and at lower cost when there is damage. And then there's that transformation piece that I talked about a little bit earlier. You can kind of think ahead and begin making changes on your farm now that are going to serve you well as conditions change in the future. And then the last piece, and we'll be getting into this last piece on Saturday in the adaptation workshop session. And the bottom part of the diagram is basically saying, farmers, here is a resilience toolbox. And typically what I find is that farmers tend, like anybody, there's certain go-to tools that you tend to use on your farm. But I think what's really important, given the nature of the challenges of weather patterns changing, is that we want to make sure we're thinking about all the tools in the toolbox. And so that's the bottom part of this diagram. And notice the first tool in the tool or section of the toolbox is that whole farm planning, which we did this morning. We got started on this morning. Okay? So that gives you a roadmap for the rest of this process. And then the last thing I want to share is just that, you're not alone here in Kentucky. Farmers all over the country are dealing with many of the same challenges. Sometimes locally it shows up on your farm a little bit differently, or some are more important or less important. But these are some of the big picture challenges that farmers all over the country are speaking to as being difficult, particularly difficult, and growing more difficult over time. And so some of it has to do with temperature changes, like seasonal temperatures increasing. Hot days and nights are increasing. And both of those things, and the growing season is lengthening, and all of these temperature changes have such enormous impact, or can, on plant development, on yield, on quality of crops. And temperatures are a kind of tricky thing. It's not that easy to change temperatures on your farm, right? So you have to get pretty crafty in thinking through how to do that. And one example that I'm seeing more and more of for dealing with these temperature changes is that folks in particularly the southern tier, the southern half of the U.S., are what's called in adaptation language retreating from summer production. So they're moving production out of the summer period where temperatures are getting so hot. So there are some adaptation options, and they're not always the ones you might think of first around temperature. So some precipitation challenges happening all over the U.S. is that annual precipitation has increased, but mostly rain is falling more in the cooler season, so it's not when you really need it, right? We're getting fewer, that came up in the video, fewer, more intense rainfalls, and also brought up here. And then there are more dry periods and drought, and mostly in the warmer seasons. So these are some of the major climate risks that farmers all over the U.S. are are talking about. And then the other piece of climate risk, there's this piece of what weather is happening on your farm, but then there's also the second piece of that is what's sensitive on your farm to those changes in weather. Okay, and so this might be a little bit unusual language for you. This comes straight out of just adaptation science, but you can think about one way to begin managing climate risk is to think about the specific weather events on your farm, because your experience of climate change may be different from a neighbor's experience just over the hill. Or if you're in a floodplain, it's going to be different from an experience of a neighbor who's higher up in the landscape. Does that make sense? And so although global warming or climate change is global, climate risk is local. It's very specific, not just to your location, but also the crops that you grow, your farming system. And what that means is that you're the expert. You are the expert on how you're going to cultivate resilience on your farm. You know that land, you know your crops. Sometimes it's going to take a little more study of the crops that you grow or the livestock, and maybe a little more awareness of your landscape. But you can take these ideas around resilience and around adaptation to climate change and apply them to your farm, and you are the expert on that. Okay, no one else knows your farm and your operation as well as you do. So we think about assets, or you can think of it as parts of your farm that are sensitive, particularly sensitive to climate risk. You can lay out this list here. So for example, grain crops are most sensitive to heat, drought, and flooding. That kind of covers it pretty much, doesn't it? Fruits are particularly sensitive to warming winters and more variable springs. Is anyone here growing any tree fruits? Is anybody doing that, or really even small fruits, and gotten caught by a late frost or an early bloom followed by a late frost? Yeah, very common all over the country. Vegetables are particularly sensitive to higher pest and disease pressures and weather extremes. So hot and cold, wet and dry, and then something that is becoming more common around the country is an extreme change in temperature over a very short period as well. Livestock to heat and weather extremes, soil and water resources to more variable weather and extremes. Let's not forget the people on the farm. So management, both stress of managing, but also labor, are particularly sensitive to heat, more variable weather and extremes. And then infrastructure, the built environment on the farm, more sensitive to weather extremes. So really all to take away from this list is just that different crops, different parts of your farm, the infrastructure, the people, are going to be more or less sensitive to a particular weather event on your farm. Make sense? Any questions about that? Anybody have an experience to say, yeah, my veg is really sensitive? I had this last year, this thing happened. Yeah. Yeah. So strawberries in a high tunnel, and was it effective? Did it work? Yeah. So you. Yeah. But you were able to use irrigation to protect the crop. That's great. Yeah. He's had trouble with drought?
Yeah, he irrigates with water.
Oh, and the creek's gone dry. Yeah, and is that the first time in his experience that kind of thing has happened? No. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of new issues around water supply for sure with that, yeah. Okay, so then last thing I want to point out to you, remember I've talked a little bit about this. I keep saying last thing, but actually there's a few more things. But I keep talking about, this transformation, this idea of looking ahead, So where can you get information to look ahead? Well, I'm very happy to say in the SARE bulletin, there's actually a pretty incredible table. This table was developed with climate scientists, and it's the first time that climate scientists sat down with a farmer, i.e. me, and I said, this sort of, 100 years from now, the weather's going to be hotter by 2 degrees. That doesn't really help me. It's not even in my mind. I'm not thinking about 100 years from now, or really even 50 years from now. And so, the science is limited, but we were able to come up with some ideas that they could provide data for that I think are useful to farmers. And so I just want to alert you that in that bulletin, you've got a nice table. And what I did was just pulled out the weather information from the southeast region. I think you're in a tricky region, actually. Here's all the regions here. You can see at the lower left. And my gut tells me you're kind of probably more Midwest, except for the east side of Kentucky, which is probably more kind of Appalachian, southern, southeast. I don't know. So you're in a, maybe we'll just say you're in an interesting location in the country. But I still think this kind of data can be useful to you. And so just walking you through this really quickly, you can take a look in the SARE bulletin. This is for the Southeast. What the paragraph on top just gives you kind of, here's what's happened. Here's what's happened so far in this region. Annual and seasonal temps have steadily increased since the 1970s, blah, blah, blah. So you can go through and see kind of, here's the situation now, and I think this is the really valuable bit. And here's what's going to happen by mid-century, which when I first started working on this, mid-century seemed like a really long time from now, right? And yet now that I'm thinking about it, it's kind of, because mid-century is 2040 to 2060. It's kind of in this range. How many years away is 2040? It's certainly within the working life of younger farmers these days, right? And even if you're kind of not willing to go there, I think this data is useful to think about. Here's where we're headed. Here's the trajectory. And remember, we're not in a new normal. Did you notice a farmer said that in the video? Remember, we're not. It's going to keep shifting. And so this gives you a sense of how the weather's going to shift. There's going to be, and you can see on the bottom and in the table, great definitions of each of these kinds of data. But basically, running through just a few, the way you read this table is this annual temperature is going to increase. The greatest increase will be in the Northwest, which would be Kentucky, right? The greatest increase, because we're talking about the Southeast region. And seasonal increase in temperature will be greatest in the summer, especially in the Northwest. So you can start thinking now about the likely reality that temperatures will be increasing and they'll be increasing the most in the Northwest of the Southeast region. That's that sort of grayish area on the map, and that seasonal increases will be greatest in the summer. So summers are going to get hotter, and the increase is going to be, an increase in temperature is going to be the greatest in the Northwest. And what state's in the Northwest part of the Southeast? Yeah. So that's how you might use this. You know, some of these other new kinds of ways to think about climate. Let's see. You can think about hot days. If you look down at the bottom, the data that you have here include annual temperatures, annual precip, which I've never found particularly interesting as a farmer. It's like, no, what matters is at least seasonal. Give me at least seasonal, right? But also growing season length. So look at that. In the Southeast, growing season is going to increase by about 30 days over the next 20 years, right? Hot spells, cold days, freeze days, wet days, and dry spells. So this kind of more subtle, it's not about flooding, rain, or drought, right? But equally important to farmers is knowing kind of how we're going to have more dry spells. Are we going to have more freeze days or less freeze days, as the case may be? In some parts of the Southeast, there will be no more days below 10 degrees. That's what's projected. Be zero numbers of days. So I think really useful. It does take you a minute. You have to spend a minute or so to kind of understand what this data is showing you. This is the last thing before we get going. I feel like I want to let you go. Yeah. Well, I'm going to do this. We'll just do this. So another way that I think, so a lot of my effort in the last decade has been, how do we take this climate data, which is great but not very useful to farmers, and make it useful to farmers? So another thing I did, which I think makes sense to me anyway, is I sat down with the state meteorologist in North Carolina, and I said, hey, you know, can you help me think through, I want to work together with you, and let's go season by season, and you tell me what the weather's going to do, and I'll think about how that's going to affect a farm. So that's what this is, basically. And you will have this. We'll make sure if you want to get back to this particular. It's not so much the information on this sheet, it's more, or this slide, it's more the idea of how to work through thinking about your farm and how it's going to respond to changing weather. And so in the winter, because they're going to be warmer, there's going to be less pest dieback. There'll be slower chill accumulation if you're growing fruits. There's going to be increased plant growth and development. I've seen this actually all over the country as the winters have warmed. Farmers are saying, farmers that have really got cover crops dialed in, winter cover crops dialed in, they're saying, you know, it used to be, it all worked great. The cover crop was coming into maturity right when I needed to kill it anyway and plant my spring planting. And now there's a gap. The cover crop is maturing early, sometimes a month, sometimes 6 weeks, and now there's a gap in their rotation. And so one of the things that they're working on with extension is figuring out a short crop they can put in that gap before they put in their cash crop. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, and then also increased soil microbial activity. Soils are warmer. So there's more likelihood that there's going to be some kind of decomposition in your soils in the winter, which means you're going to release nitrogen, and plants aren't growing as quickly, or your crop's not in there, and so you may be losing some nitrogen. You see how the thinking I'm using? And I really think as a farmer, you can think through exactly this kind of thing. You know, if you know warmers are winter, if you know springs are going to be more variable, you can begin to think how that's going to affect your current production plans and begin to make some changes those plans. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm not going to walk through all of these. If it's something that really interests you, we can come back. We can come back to it before we break today. So then the other thing, I did do some searching around trying to find some Kentucky-specific resources for you to use. I gotta say, there's not a lot. There's definitely some good work to be done in Kentucky to support farmers better. There is the third bullet, the UK Ag Weather Center, and there's kind of some good stuff there. But I think that's something maybe Oak could really think through how we maybe get some more help from the Kentucky Ag Weather Center. But the other two they're both national websites, but you can get down to the state level, those state climate summaries. So you pick Kentucky and you can go to that, and it'll give you some information about how weather's changing. And then Climate Explorer, again, a national resource, but you can go down to the county level there and learn more about how weather's changing. And this picture, I included just one example. This is from the state climate summaries, because this is Kentucky. You see that up there in the top left of this graph. It is kind of graphy. It's kind of sciencey and science data and data-y. So I really think there's a lot of scope. There's a lot of good work to be done in Kentucky to interpret this data for farmers. But just as an example of what you can see, that's the observed numbers of very cold nights, and that data runs from 1900 to 2000. I believe that's true. And what you can see fairly clearly in this graph and the discussion associated with it is that the number of cold nights has definitely dropped. Do you see how that's happened in the last, 20 years? 20 years. So those are the kinds of visuals, data visualizations you can find at these sites. So now it's your turn. What are the threats on your farm? What are the assets most at risk? And so again, you've got this worksheet 3, so you can fill that out. And it's a two-sided worksheet, but you're basically just laying out what are some of those. Well, you don't need to fill it out for every weather threat, but I just laid them out there to make it a little easier for you to get going on this worksheet. So for the weather threats that are most important to your farm, you want to try to fill out the assets at risk, how you're currently managing it, and then take a minute to think about, I think about that excess moisture as a challenge, but does it provide any opportunities? So that's what we're doing. You got enough energy to do that? Yep, you're ready to go? Okay. So we will give you, we're going to give you 15 minutes to do this. I think most farmers can do this pretty quickly. We'll give you 15 minutes, get some good stuff on that worksheet, and raise your hand if you're not sure what you're supposed to be doing right now. Okay, well, I'm feeling like the energy at both tables is kind of shifted back into storytelling and just talking and chatting, which is absolutely fine. But I thought I would close the work session for now, because just about everybody let me know they feel like they're done. And so we'll end the workshop a little early, but what I want to do is I will stick around until 12:30, and if you have any questions or you want me to help you with any part of what we've done today, I'll stick around until 12:30 and happy help you do that. So I just, as we did before, I'm curious, I'm a little bit curious, which is somebody willing to share something that they added to their worksheet 3, a threat that they're thinking about, or that they included. Maybe we'll start with the 10+ acres folks. What's an example of a threat that you decided to work on?
Well, can you hear me okay?
That's great.
Yeah. This is kind of ongoing for most of us here. It's our grasslands.
Yeah.
We have to work on them. We have to adapt them. And in adapting the grasslands, like if you're at a current risk management, you look at different varieties. We were talking about Lesbedeza. If you get into standard farming practices that we've been taught for the last 40 years, Lesbedeza is not in it. It doesn't have the tonnage that it produces properly. But it's resilient to drought and different things like that. And that's what we have to look at, and that's just the new opportunities. You take what you've been taught, and then you start looking at different varieties, different products that you can grow that fits what we're dealing with.
Yeah, so which threat would you, where does that, thinking about adapting grasslands, which threats are causing you to have to think about adapting grassland?
Dry period.
Yep.
Variability in the temperatures.
Kind of all of it, huh?
All of it.
Yeah.
Not the flooding. The flooding you can mitigate. You just stay away from the flood zones.
Yeah.
But yeah, all of it.
Yeah. And what did you put? What were some of the thoughts you had about the assets most at risk for that? So if we can stay within the grassland idea, but what assets are most at risk, would you say?
What we're dealing with this year alone?
Well, no, just in general, your idea that you really need to start thinking about adapting your grasslands. What assets did you include that were at risk? So obviously your pasture or your grassland is one, but what else?
When you're growing any kind of livestock,
yeah,
okay, cost of gain is what it's referred to.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to keep your animals healthy. So that's what's at risk.
Yeah,
animal
exactly,
health.
Exactly, yeah. And then when you're dealing with a drought and you're trying to keep those animals healthy, is there any other part of the farm that maybe is also under more stress besides the animals?
Absolutely.
What part?
Would depend on the field, would depend on what's in the field, what you're growing, what grass variety, mixtures of grasses.
Yeah.
You have to look at the farm and then break it down into the sections of the farm. So it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Each chunk needs to be evaluated constantly, basically, and then you need to make a plan to change it or leave it alone.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like something like planned grazing you're talking about, or rotational grazing, a lot of words for it these days.
Pretty much.
Okay, but I'm still wondering about the stress of having to adjust those plans and move those animals, and sometimes maybe have to get water to them. Who's bearing that stress? What part of the farm?
None.
Say what?
None of it is not stress.
What I'm trying to get at is the people. I'm trying to get at the people. Only because that is often the last thing we think about is ourselves when we're in a stressful situation and trying to manage it. But thank you. You did great. What's your current risk management practice for that grassland? I'm going to walk through the table just a little bit.